So my question to the group this morning is, will the oil price recovery back above $80 this morning, will the oil price recovery derail or accelerate the energy transition in Oman? Derail because the urgency perhaps is taken away, or accelerate because the financial muscle might be back in the toolbox to accelerate or derail the transition? What is the view of this room? Accelerate or derail the transition? Let me take the opportunity while we wait for the survey result to invite Steve Kelly, President and General Manager of Oxy Oman, to open his camera, and also Walter Simpson, Managing Director of CC Energy Development, to also open your camera and turn on your microphone, Steve and Walter. Okay. Great. Steve, before we get, I'd like to start with you in the next session, is get the answer to the survey so everybody can be put out of their sense of on this question. But survey result, Irene, do we have that? Yes, we do. Accelerate, a somewhat optimistic sense in the room today that on this occasion things will be different. Steve, your initial thoughts on that survey result? Are you optimistic that we will see that acceleration?
Good morning, Sean, and good morning. I guess I'm concerned and I say worried, but I have a concern that it may do exactly what you described. Derail, maybe a bit of a strong word for it, but it certainly has the potential to take some of the urgency out of some of the discussions that we've had on the energy transition. What I'm hopeful for is that I think that a number of the stakeholders have made decisive turns in the direction that they're going. Speaking, for the energy sector, I know that energy companies that are involved in Oman have all made decisive turns over the period leading up to where we are today, both in terms of transition to renewable energy sources and in commitment to carbon management. So I think we've got, as a sector, we've got a huge role to play. We have to play a role in getting that message across, because not all of the areas of things that we are pushing for are generally accepted yet as being part of the solution base. And we need to get some progress on the ground and then demonstrate that what we're doing is driving the world in the right direction.
Let's welcome Walter Simpson. Walter, we've seen in the last decade alone gas consumption from 2008 to 2017 in Oman triple in its use, from about 400 million per cubic feet per day to 1.4 billion and counting. Ultimately, my question to you to kick us off in the Nexus is, how can energy companies in Oman work more closely with food and water sectors to drive efficiencies across the Nexus? I mean, ultimately, the energy side of things does account for close to 90% of greenhouse gas emissions in Oman. So we clearly have a role to play. How can we cooperate, do you think, across the Nexus?
Well, good morning, Sean. Good morning, everybody. I think you're right. I mean, the industry has a key role to play. And we're right in the centre of change. And that's nothing new. That's been true since the oil industry started in the late 19th century. Always been right at the centre of upheaval and change and growth for good and bad. So us being involved in that kind of change isn't anything new to the industry. What is different, I think, is that, as you say, it's that realisation of how the central energy and food and water are together, and how we can work as teams to make that happen. And I think our role in that is we've got a lot of experience in these areas and a lot to bring to the table. But I do sense we lack some trust. We're not generally trusted, and I think that was certainly true in terms of how COP sees the hydrocarbon industry, didn't invite it even to COP. So I do
Yet
think
now the next two are being hosted in major hydrocarbon producing countries. So clearly the next 2 years, the conversation is going to evolve. And there's an opportunity there.
And I think that's very good, because I think it is central to an effective change. An effective transition cannot be effectively done, I don't think, without the involvement and the oil industry, the hydrocarbon industry, particularly driving things, because we're actually very good at it. We've done a lot of work in this area, a huge amount, and the industry that people comment on at COP and the activists complain about, it's not industry I recognise from working. This is an industry that has been responsible, does work on the stewardship of resources. So I think we bring a lot to the table. My challenge is, are we trusted that we're bringing something to the table that's valuable? And I think that's an area we've got to work at, is get that trust. And then I'm with Steve on that. How do you build that trust? It's about reducing our emissions, being transparent about the fact we're working hard to do it. It's about managing water sources effectively. And that may be reusing, or it may be making sure that saline water doesn't contaminate areas. It's about being responsible with those resources and showing we're doing that. And then I think it's working with the community. So actually helping all of the industries in our areas, building that trust with them and seeing as value. And then I think we can bring solutions that people can take on board and work with.
Steve, Phimister, I mean, I was just coming back to the first question I asked you, and it sort of seems apt now, and the difference from an international actor, obviously operating all over the world, but in a sense, somewhat reactive at times, but trying to lead maybe in certain areas. But here in a country like Oman, the national energy company is seen as a leader regardless of what you're actually, your business you're in. But my point is, which does the national energy sector, does the national energy have a responsibility to lead in this rather than the food sector or the water sector in Oman? How do you see that balance, if you like, as such a big national energy actor? I was with Aramco the other day, and they were talking about the role of Aramco and how they're called upon to do all sorts of things. They built the Saudi pavilion in the Dubai Expo, and are responsible for staffing it for the first 6 months, because Aramco gets things done. They know how to do things, etc. I mean, the same way PDO has that kind of posture in Oman. I'm wondering where you see the responsibility of leading in the Nexus, and on your thoughts.
Yeah, interesting question. So do major oil companies like PDO or my colleagues on the panel have a role? Yes. Do we lead? Well, I think that depends. So if you're talking about the Nexus, we have definitely got a role to play in that. But PDO is in some regards a water company as well as an oil and gas company, right? So produce a large amount of water.
I think is it fair to say about 1 to 10 in terms of production?
Thereabouts, 9 or 10 barrels of water to every barrel of oil, indeed. So it's clear that we have a responsibility and accountability to manage that resource. We don't produce food, but the Nexus joins us together. So I spoke earlier about how we need the right framework, the right governance in place together with government and regulators to be able to do that. But do I need to stand up and be a leader and lead by example? Yes. Absolutely, and as Walter was just saying, I think we absolutely have a role in that. I mean, if I take water management as an example, we have already in place a clear policy and a strategy to reduce, reuse, and relocate. So if we're producing 9 to 10 barrels of water for every barrel of oil, we need to do something responsible with that. So we reduce by trying to minimize the amount of water that we produce, which is an efficiency matter, because if it comes to surface, I have to process it, I have to consume energy to deal with it, I have to re-inject it or use it otherwise. And so there's an energy efficiency factor. I can reuse it because I can maximize oil recovery in the process by pressure support, but I can also relocate it and take it from areas where there's excess water to where there's a shortage. And we do that. We manage our water resources extremely carefully. In the north of Oman, we're reusing currently for salt making. In the south, we're putting it to use in agricultural purposes. We completed a research project in Nima at our reed bed location last year and tested salt tolerant species for agriculture, so for biosaline agriculture, which is something we're going to go ahead with. And I think, MEM, the ministry and the Research Council put together the Oman Water Hub just last year as well. So there you have water professionals, which come from other sectors and other companies, together with academia and government and the oil sector, putting together ways in which we can innovate and solve problems in water. So I think water is a very, very good example of where we cross over in the Nexus. And in a water short country, it's a particularly important matter for us to manage. So yes, I think we need to stand tall and manage not just the production and the responsible production of hydrocarbons, but also how we manage across sectors in the Nexus. I think that's really important for us to play a key role.
Steve, your thoughts on the same question, leading, so you're an international energy company operating in Oman with partners, etc. But the role of the energy sector, the opportunity of the energy sector to lead in this area, and some of the obstacles to that nexus and that cooperation, do you think that need to be overcome?
Yeah, I think that the advantage that we have here is that we're, number one, we're respected. We've been fundamental to the development and growth of and prosperity in the country. So we generally have good standing in the community. So the trust,
you have that trust that Walter talked about.
Exactly, the trust issue. If you ask, if you poll the Oman population, the trust level for us, all, for PDO, for CCED, for Oxy, for Dalil, the trust levels are high. You have the same poll in the United Kingdom or Denmark or the United States. The trust levels are generally very, very low, and it's a historic factor. So I think that we can build on that, and it means that there are things that we can do here, to demonstrate progress. We can make inroads into driving towards lower carbon economy, to zero emissions power production over time, with trust on our side, because the resistance to the projects is not going to be as apparent. That might change over time as the younger population builds up. They're more connected with the rest of the world, and we have to be aware of that. And we have to make sure that we're not complacent about the trust levels that we have here. Over
50% of the Omani population under the age of 25.
Indeed, very, and I don't know what, I think it's 30% of it is under 12. And, so there's a huge bow wave of young people coming through, and we do need to make sure that that we maintain that trust, because we have to have a long time horizon on this. This is not, we're not going to be boxed up and finished on this in the next 5 to 10 years. This is a 2040, 2050, 2060 time horizon. So that's something that we need to build on. But it does put us in a position that's, if you look at our energy, our portfolios around the world, this is an area of the world where we know that we have a head start in terms of buy-in from government and buy-in from the population. We already help and support the local population. We already help and support the food and the water sector. I mean, there are practical, hands-on examples of working hand in hand with whether it's date palm plantations or livestock farming, that are initiatives that have been set up with a view to food security, that are making use of relationships with concession holders in the country. We can set aside land within the concession area that doesn't interfere with the exploration and production of oil and gas, and make room for and provide basic utilities and support infrastructure, roads and so on.
Yeah.
For those sectors to make use of that. And then I, of course, echo Steve's comments about water. We've long described ourselves as a water business that produces oil. And Mukhaizna, as an example, is no different in sort of volumes. Everything starts with deep, heavily saline aquifer water, which doesn't get anywhere near the normal water supply chain. All of our steam generation is built on that base as makeup water, and then the reuse of produced water for steam generation. And that's, steam generation requires pretty purified water to be able to do it, and we don't go anywhere near any aquifers that are that could be used for irrigation or for human consumption. So, I think that leadership is something that we can play our part in. Whether we're right in the center of it is a different question, but I think we certainly need to be able to build on the trust levels we have.
Walter, before we come to you on this, I'd like to go to the survey question to start to bring in some of the solutions. I mean, energy efficiency is as important, and that's certainly the question of the survey. Is energy efficiency is as important as alternative energy sources in Oman? Agree or disagree? The idea that we need to go and build the world's biggest solar farms and wind farms, etc. Yes, perhaps, but energy efficiency, Walter, is a pretty critical one. I'm wondering your thoughts on the technologies there that are now available to really deploy, and what within the context of this COVID period, were there lessons learned that can be continued?
Absolutely. Look, I think one of the biggest tools available to us that's new and that I don't think is really being explored to its full potential is digitization and using that data to get the efficiency. And I believe that one of the real benefits of COVID was that workforces got used to using digital solutions to be able to work. Now, not necessarily the fancy digital solutions I'm talking about here in AI to improve efficiency, but the entire workforce became comfortable with this kind of conference, doing it virtually, doing it from home and working in a different way. And I think the benefit of that will play on to a better take up on these kind of digital solutions. So I do think there are opportunities for us, and I'm absolutely in the space where, the first thing you need to do is be as efficient as possible in your energy use before you start looking for alternatives. Because even when you move to the alternative, if you're not efficient in your energy use, you're going to waste the alternative. So we've really got to drive that as a solution to this.
Similar, Steve, on that energy efficiency, leveraging innovative technologies to reduce wastewater and so forth. What would you identify as some of those opportunities? Steve Phimister.
Steve P. Do you want to take it, Steve K? Yeah, look, it's so I can tell you a little bit about how we've approached it, because I think I read somewhere, I think it was in the IEA, who suggested that by leveraging existing technologies, and particularly Walter was talking about digital technologies, and we all know the range of technologies available to us through AI and predictives and Internet of Things, and if fully implemented, I think it was IEA who said you can achieve something like 30 to 60% emission reduction without having to enter into the multi-billion type dollar investments that are being touted. Now, that doesn't mean to say we're not going to have to do those, because we are. And there are multiple independent reports that demonstrate that we need to be investing in alternative fuels and low carbon fuels, offsets such as CCS and so forth. But certainly at a local scale, what we have been doing for a number of years now is applying a methodology that has a value-based approach. And so we have, over the last 5 or so years, we've employed 32 new technologies across what we call our 10 corporate challenges. So they include core hydrocarbon production issues, but critically, energy efficiency is one of the 10, and water management is another one.
And so you have, on that point, sorry, Steve, to interrupt you, I just wanted to get you to focus a little bit into the influence. We talked about leadership before in terms of the sector, but inevitably a big opportunity to influence the supply chain. I mean, you have a massive supply chain in Oman and the ability to drive efficiencies there. If you might just touch on that.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because we had this, I just came from running the upstream business for Shell in the UK, and this is a major point of discussion there. If you look at anything in Northwestern European policy on energy transition, you'll see the supply chain actually at the centre. As operators, we like to think we're right at the centre of it because that's how we're trained to be. But actually, it's the supply chain that holds a lot of the capability and the competence and the technology. I think when it comes to technology, by the way, I see more and more oil companies and operators not resorting to proprietary solutions. The solutions are already in the supply chain. The question is, how do you collaborate and innovate with those companies to implement those technologies in your business? So I think, with over 60 years or so, we've been developing the supply chain in Oman and local companies. And that creates jobs, local manufacturing, services, development of small and medium enterprises. If you look at the local SLCCs, the super local community companies, a number of digital accelerators that have been put in place, R&D, innovation, new engineering companies, construction companies. We have developed in Oman that supply chain. So we now have to repurpose that in some sense, as we repurpose ourselves to the energy transition, our skills, and also repurpose our infrastructure. The supply chain is going to be super critical in that for a sustainable transition. And I think, there are multiple opportunities already if you look around in the supply chain, you already see people taking that on, for example, in agriculture and pumps and reverse osmosis and so forth. You can see the innovation already there, 3D printing. It's already in our sector. So we have to leverage that. We have to, because then once you combine that with what Walter was talking about in terms of our digital solutions and application of AI and automation, then you can get a safer, more efficient, reliable oil business, but also one that's doing that sustainably by leveraging the capability within our supply chain.
I just want to finish up talking a little bit about, I started my opening comments, Steve Kelly, about the idea of part of the transition, part of the Nexus also is energy companies transforming, oil companies transforming, the whole idea, branding even, right? The Qatar, Petroleum, Qatar Energy, the Equinor, from Statoil to Equinor, and so forth. Oxy even sort of in its recent branding, moving away from its past identity, but ultimately also the business. You talk there about being a water company. I think you said water management that produced oil. You might now be going forward to say, well, actually, you're a carbon management company that produces water and oil. Talk a little bit about the carbon opportunity, the carbon management. There is now this new Oxy Low Carbon Ventures using human-made CO2 emissions in new ways.
It's a really exciting direction. I think the way we characterize this is that we have what's right in front of us at the moment. We've got a transition period ahead of us. Our ambition and our ultimate objective is that we will be regarded as a carbon management company. So we're building that. We're building on the base of long, many years, many decades of CO2 management, a major injector of CO2 into underground reservoirs, building on those skills and aligning ourselves in relationships with other technology providers in the field of both in direct air capture, in zero emissions, hydrocarbon powered power generation with our Net Power project, and then also reusing the CO2 with the CO2 that's captured, whether it's from direct air capture or from point source capture. Then we can use that immediately in EOR projects in Oman is a great location to be able to do that. But also being able to permanently store in saline aquifers, where you get better certification and you can access the carbon credit market, and then also repurposing the CO2 that you capture into low carbon fuels and other products. The technology that around this is in some cases is in infancy, and in other cases is being demonstrated today. So we've got zero emissions power generation synchronizing to the grid. In Texas, we've got a demonstration project being built on the direct air capture. So we're
Net zero concrete production.
We've got a number of projects that are on the ground now, and we're really excited about that. I think that just to go back to the point about the supply chains, is I think that what's going to be really critical going forward is that the relationship between ourselves and the vendors in the supply chain, logistics people in the supply chain, is that we've got to look forward to a future where we're working in partnership, and we're looking for people who get the big picture here, that don't just want to sell a product. They want to be part of that integrated supply chain that drives towards the sort of efficiencies that we're talking about.
Walter, your closing comments on that equation. You mentioned it earlier. We are energy efficiency is important. 90% agree. No surprise there, perhaps. Walter, the idea that you can utilize existing skills to do new things, that as an outcome, as a future in terms of the Nexus, but also in terms of a more lower carbon energy company.
Look, undoubtedly, as an industry, we've been very creative and we've solved some very, very difficult problems over the years.
But surprisingly, not carbon. I mean, carbon capture. I mean, Steve Phimister mentioned that we've been at this for 10 years. Carbon capture sequestration still seems to be an over-the-hill challenge.
And undoubtedly it is. But the investment of money, the desire to do it, the outside pressure, all of those help to drive those solutions. And I think it's an integral part of the industry surviving, and particularly when I see this place for the smaller independents, what do I think is important to us? We've got to be the low-cost producer. So that means really focusing on supply chain and working with your partners to make sure that everything is driven as efficiently as possible. You've got to have low emissions, and that comes with the easy, let's stop flaring, but to the more complicated, even where we are burning fossil fuels, how do we capture the carbon and store it? And then managing our water effectively and our waste. And as I mentioned earlier, being a valued member of the community. It doesn't matter how good you are at all of the first ones. If the community doesn't want you, you're out. So I think those all fit together as being vital for us as an industry to be a part of the future of Oman and future of many countries where I think we're an integral bit of the transition.
Steve Phimister, your closing comments?
Sure. There was a couple of quick things I just wanted to touch upon, and if I may, to close. I think the first thing I observe, and it's less prevalent in Oman and the GCC, but other parts of the world, it's dominant. The first thing is I feel the debate is polarized. And I think that society generally is pushing to trying to switch off the current energy system before we've actually designed and built the new one. I mean, the key word here is transition. And so what I heard at ADIPEC is a very clear sense of how we need to use COP27 in Egypt and COP28 in Abu Dhabi in UAE to shine a light on this issue. So as players in the energy system, we're not complacent or arrogant, but if one turns off one energy system before you design and build another, you're into a supply crunch and you're into energy deficiency, particularly in developing or less developed countries. And we need to be cautious of that. I think today people are already talking about supply crunch because investment in hydrocarbons has turned down dramatically in the last couple of years. So we need to be conscious of that factor and how we are going to continue to sustainably invest in hydrocarbons in the transition. We're committed to the transition, but it is a transition. And I think secondly, picking up on something Walter said on trust, is that as an industry globally, I don't think we've got our narrative right yet, because we see ourselves as part of the solution, but I don't think most of the stakeholders, particularly the court of public opinion, agrees with us. And we have a lot of work to do to demonstrate and build that trust, to have the right to be a part of the solution, And I do think that COP coming to the region, North Africa and the Middle East, will make a big difference in that. And I think
it will, but it will also put a spotlight on the inconsistencies, as it did similarly in Glasgow, as it did to Qatar when they were hosting the World Cup, or their prep. It will come with a spotlight of opportunity, but also of challenge.
Indeed, but I think we're up for that, right? And so I don't think you can work your way through this without being part of the dialogue.
Absolutely. I mean, if there's anything that comes out of the next 2 years, one would think a great success to be seen as part of the solution and not part of the problem. That would be a great outcome of the next 2 years. I must wrap it up there. Really appreciate it. Steve Phimister, the new Managing Director of Petroleum Development Oman. Thank you so much. Steve Kelly, President General Manager of Oxy Oman, and Walter Simpson, Managing Director of CCED. Thank you for your time this morning.